All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about today is a psychological response that food has on our brains, which seems a little weird for a health and nutrition seminar. You'd think I'd start talking about calorie restriction or an exercise program or something like that. But really, the effect that food has on our brain has a really, really big effect on us and our relationship with food. And a lot of our relationship with food, or the psychological effect that food has on our brain, some of it we know about already. Some of it is brand new to us. And unless we're aware of it, we're going to be held a victim to it. So the ones you know about already are things like after supper, what do you want? Sweet. Yes, you want a little something that's sweet. There's no nutritive value. There's no digestion aid in having a piece of cake after supper, but it's just something we want. It's a psychological response. It's our brain telling us to eat a piece of cake. The same seems to be true for chips at lunch. People don't think they've had lunch unless they've had chips with it. In fact, if you go to Subway and buy a sandwich, they call it a meal when you add chips to it. So that's, again, a psychological response, something that our brain wants that our body doesn't necessarily ask for or need, but this is part of our relationship with food. So along with those that we probably know about already, there are some responses that our brain is having to food that we don't know about. So to begin to tell you about that, I have to let you know that our bodies were designed to crave 3 flavors: sweet, salty, and fatty flavors. That's what we're designed to want. The sweet, because our body knows it's an instant burst of energy and we can run a quick mile on it. The fatty, because it's a long, slow energy source that will sustain us for several hours. And the salty tells our body that we can retain enough fluid to get us through whatever projects or whatever we've got going on during the day. So we've got that aspect. Now, in order for us to keep eating those flavors, our brain then rewards us when it senses that we've had those flavors by giving us a hit of dopamine, which is a pleasure endorphin. Makes us feel good. So it's a reward. And what that does is it ensures that when it's time to eat again, we'll go back to those food choices to get the dopamine hit. Now, when we get those food flavors in whole foods, like meat and veggies, which we suggest you eat on the Whole30 program, there's also a benefit that has to do with 2 triggers in our bodies. The first comes from our stomach that triggers our brain. When our stomach is full, it says, stop eating, we're full. Now, the benefits of that, when you eat whole foods, they take up a lot of space in your stomach. Vegetables take a lot of space in your stomach. So you eat a few vegetables, you get the trigger that says we're full, and stop. So your brain tells you to stop eating. It's a break on your food. It tells you when to stop. The other trigger that happens is actually in our intestines. It's in our intestines that the nutrients are pulled out of the food. And when your body knows, when your guts know that you've got enough nutrients, they too signal your brain and say, stop. We're fed, so you can stop. So we call those food breaks. Those 2 triggers are food breaks. What has happened, though, over the last 50 years is that our food that we eat has become less whole food and more processed food. So the food engineers who are making this processed food aren't dumb. They know that what we're looking for is sweet, salty, and fat, so they said, we'll give them that. But instead of just giving us sweet, salty, and fat, they give us sweet, salty, and fat that have had all the nutrients pulled out of them. They give us sweet, salty, and fat that have been hyper flavorized. And so it's really salty and really fatty and really sugary. And it makes us, because of that dopamine release that's associated with those tastes, we get a bigger and bigger and bigger dopamine release, which means, in layman's terms, we become more and more and more addicted to that food because we seek that food because it makes us feel better, not because it's nutritious. But we're going for that dopamine hit instead of the actual nutrient value. So again, with processed foods, we have to look at those 2 stop triggers. Remember that the one in our stomach tells our brain to stop eating because it's full. Well, processed food basically is pre-digested food. I mean, yuck, that's what it is. So it takes up hardly any room in our stomachs at all. So we have to eat more processed food to get the feeling of full before our stomach triggers our brain to stop eating. The other thing happens in our gut, which, remember, that pulls out the nutrients from our food. Well, processed food, they've already pulled the nutrients out. They have done that intentionally. So our gut sees all this food coming by, but no nutrients coming by, nothing to pull out. So instead of getting enough nutrients and telling our brain to stop eating, it says, nope, no nutrients, keep eating. Bring some more, we need some more food, and continue to tell our brain to keep eating, which is why, against your will, you will end up eating the whole bag of chips. So we call that food with no brakes. Both of those braking systems don't work when we're eating processed foods. And because they've hyper-flavoritized the food, we're getting these dopamine hits, so really our choices are being taken away from us as we go through this process. It's sad. It's sad, but it's something that we need to know so that we can counteract it. When we're making healthy food choices, we can choose to eat whole foods. One of the goals that you're going to have during this Whole30 program is that you want to rewire your brain so that you have only healthy psychological responses to the food you're eating. So that means that you're going to be eating vegetables and meats and not eating something like sweet potato chips. You know, it's possible to take a sweet potato and cut it thin, put some olive oil on it, salt it, and bake it, and end up with a chip, which is legal. All of those things are legal on the Whole30 program. But sweet potato chips are not legal because of the psychological response they have, because it's still this non-nutritive thing we want to do to crunch at lunch. And so because that has a non-healthy psychological response, that's off the books. So we have to think about this as we eat our foods. We have to think about what kind of psychological response is this food having on me. For a while I was having grapes and pecans after I ate. And I realized, wait a minute, that's dessert. And even though grapes and pecans are both legal on the program, it's not legal for me to eat this because I'm treating it as a dessert. So that's a negative psychological response. I can't have it. Okay, so you see that's what's going to do? So one of the cool things during this Whole30 is you're going to be able to rewire your psychological responses. Your stomach and your gut will be able to communicate with your brain in the way they're supposed to. You will be removed from these hyper-flavored things so that you'll be able to trust your taste buds. You know, really and truly, after having been on the Whole30 program for a while, there is nothing more offensive to your taste buds than a Dorito. It is just gross. Too much flavor, and it's loud, and it's just like, ew, icky. But after having retrained your taste buds, you're going to be able to taste what real food tastes like, and you will learn to like real food. And the best news about this whole thing is that by the end of the Whole30 program, you're going to be eating what you like. And so that's not hard at all, right? It's easy to eat what you like. And at the end of this, if we follow this and be careful about our psychological response, your eating, the things that you eat, will be exactly what you want to eat, which is why this is a life change program and not a short-term fix program. So we're going to watch out for our psychological response. We're only going to eat food that gives a good, positive, healthy psychological response, and you're going to love how this makes you feel.